So this was the biggest gig of my life, right? And I was going to be performing in front of maybe 1,000 people, and I'd never done that before in my life. And I turned around to this guy and I was like, should we do this line of ketamine and coke before I go on? And next to me was all my equipment like neatly packed up. I had severe depression. I couldn't get out of bed. I was, really, really low, really depressed, really anxious, had real social anxiety. I was someone that in my mind, I needed the drugs. As soon as I got clean, I started putting everything into my music, and I was living off it quite quickly. Within a year of putting everything into it, I was living off it, and now supporting a family. Somehow I'm like this responsible adult who's making techno for a living and touring around the world and performing live techno, and my wife's, she's looking after the kids, and I'm doing this. I'm supporting a family from my music.
Welcome to the Life After Sesh podcast. Stories from before, during, and after the sesh.
The sesh for me started when I was probably about 11 or 12, when someone showed me how to inhale a deodorant through a towel. And yeah, I was absolutely buzzing off my face. And I loved it, even at that age. And then quite quickly, the weed came along, and I loved that as well. I never did things by halves, From the first moment I smoked weed, it only took a couple of weeks before I was smoking weed all day, every day. And then, I grew up in a great era. I grew up in the 90s where, the rave scene was strong. So I did all the, dance drugs. And for me, again, it was just, people used to say to me, how come you're not just doing a couple of lines of speed and enjoying it? I was just like taking everything to the extreme. I was like triple dropping pills, like bombing loads of speed, like doing loads of acid. Just getting completely off my face. Candy flipping all the time. And then I moved to London when I was 18, and I started putting on illegal parties in London, and that was just it. Those were insane days,
Just a quick one. Explain to people what candy flipping is. I know, but
candy flipping is when you do LSD and pills or MDMA at the same time. I mean, later on that became, a whole multitude of drugs at the same time. So it was LSD, MDMA, ketamine, DMT, acid, I think I said that already, coke, unfortunately crack, like just all in like one big session. And that really was what it was about for me. It's about taking one of my mates put it nicely, he said, you've got the ones that take you up, you've got the ones that take you down, and then you've got the ones that take you sideways. And I like to mix them all together as much as possible. And and don't get me wrong, I had some great times. And the great times were kind of external on the dance floor, but a lot of times the great times were inside my own head as well. I just go on like mad internal journeys inside my own, like going down the corridors of my own mind. And it was an experience, and I was always into making music as well, and I was putting on the illegal parties. That was when I was about 18, 19, 20, and then when I was 21, I actually got a job at a club in London called Home. It was the super club of the time. They had Paul Oakenfold and Danny Rampling as the residents, and it opened up the same time as Fabric actually. So it was very much a case of doing coke there at work and then going to the illegal parties afterwards, and then getting on it. It's just a mess, really. It's a complete mess. I was a mess, but somehow I managed to cobble together a studio during that time, and that's when I released my first vinyl record, 2001 actually, my first vinyl record. And I had quite a promising career ahead of me back then, but of course I squandered it all on just getting out of my head as much as possible. And then I'll be like really frustrated with the world for not giving me success, even though I've spent a year like in a K-hole not making music. And I'll be like, why aren't I successful? Ketamine for breakfast, cocaine for for breakfast as well. You know, a little bit of acid in the afternoon, loads of pills, like just smoking crack, all this mad stuff, and like angry at the world for me not being a superstar. And this continued, and let's be honest about my mental health was in a bad state around that point, and I think and also I was undiagnosed. I have ADHD, autism. I wasn't diagnosed with that stuff at school, so I was a problem child. So I think a lot of it was kind of self-medicating. But I was lucky that I had this up against the balance of music. I absolutely love music, and that music actually, before I took drugs, music got me through the dark times. And to have this music, this thing that I loved, I think it saved me in a way, because otherwise I'd have probably just ended up in a crack house doing white and brown and not had any kind of drive or love or passion for something. So I was making music, so once every couple of years where I got my shit together, I would probably end up making some music, but the rest of the time I was just I don't think partying is the right word, because partying is like socializing, engaging with other people. I was just finding other people to kind of get on it with, and I was going to raves or I was going to clubs, and I was just getting totally off my head, and quite a lot of the time I wasn't even speaking to people. I'd taken so many drugs that I couldn't speak. Actually, like, there's this story when I was about 18 years old. There's this girl I really, really fancied, and I took her to a club in London called The Complex, and it's an amazing, amazing club, and Jeff Mills was the resident. It was an amazing night, and then the next day she wouldn't answer my calls, and it got back to me like, the reason she didn't want to see me anymore is that I got so out of my head I couldn't speak anymore, and that was her words. He was so out of his head he couldn't speak. So this carried on. I mean, this carried on, and it just got worse and worse and worse. I mean, my life became quite squalid. It was, I lived in, through some pretty dark times. In the end, it was just me in a room. I wasn't the pretending to party, the being out there, had gone. It was just me in a room, taking as many drugs as possible by myself, angry at the world, and then at some point I hit a rock bottom, and I realised that I needed help, and I really realised that I needed help, and it was that point that I kind of found recovery, and I got clean, and I got sober, I got clean, and I started getting the help for my mental health, and I started getting help for I went on a journey to discover who I was, basically, because I got stuck as a teenager who wouldn't tidy his bedroom. That's where I got into drugs. I got into drugs at that point, so I never matured from that point. So when I came, when I got clean, I was not an adult. I was not a functioning adult at all. I couldn't pay bills. I couldn't do everyday stuff. My bank account had, locked me out of my bank account because I wasn't allowed a bank card because I'd lost so many bank cards. I'd never had a wallet before, so I just stuffed notes in my pocket and wonder why I lost money. I was not a functioning human being, basically. Somehow through it, I was already performing live. I was a geeky kid, like I said, I'm on the autism spectrum and all that stuff. So I was, I did have the passion, and I was playing at a lot of illegal parties, and I actually started playing at, the End on a Tuesday night. I did my first, gig at Zoo Project while all this was going on. But, so this story, this was the biggest gig of my life, right? And I was going to be performing in front of maybe 1,000 people, and I'd never done that before in my life. And I turned around to this guy and I was like, should we do this line of ketamine and coke before I go on? and I racked out a line of K and Coke like that long, and I did it. And the next thing that happened, I woke up and I was at the after party, and I'd missed my gig. I'd gone into a K-hole, and I woke up, and next to me was all my equipment like neatly packed up, and the promoter had to neatly pack up my equipment, carry me out of the building, and take me to the after party. So it was self-sabotage basically. But you know, I never, you know, I didn't have a real career in music. I could have done, but you know, the drugs stopped me getting there. But when I did get clean, you know, I started to be able to put that, you know, that addictive power into my music. You know, that obsessiveness, that, you know, that single-mindedness. I started putting that into my music career. And I always say I was a little bit like Humpty Dumpty. You know, I had to put myself together, you know, bit by bit, you know, and, you know, I got a lot of help from my mental health. I got a lot of help from my addiction. I still help other people with their addiction, and, you know, and it was about growing and making connections with people, because I never really made connections with people genuinely before, and connecting with like-minded people. And then, you know, I had, you know, met my wife, and now we've got a family. I've got an 8-year-old, I've got a 10-year-old, you know, I've got a loving family. And somehow I'm like this responsible adult who's making techno for a living and touring around the world and performing live techno. And my wife's, you know, she's looking after the kids, and I'm doing this. I'm supporting a family from my music, and somehow I'm like this sensible human. I don't know how, you know, it's taken me about 15 years to get to the point where, no, that's not true. You know, I as soon as I got clean, I started putting everything into my music, and I was living off it quite quickly. Within a year of putting everything into it, I was living off it, and now supporting a family. So when I first came into recovery, I was a very unhappy person, and I had lots of mental health problems. I had no gratitude, and I had to really work on myself, you know. And I did a lot of CBT, but I also did some other work on myself, where it's a real kind of internal look at myself, and that, you know, for me is, I think one of the biggest changes was gratitude. You know, I was told to write a gratitude list every day, and I did. And it started out not being a gratitude list. It started out being things I should be grateful for, because I didn't have any gratitude. I had severe depression. I couldn't get out of bed. I was, you know, really, really low, really depressed, really anxious, had real social anxiety. So I had to work through that stuff with CBT. And do a gratitude list every day. And then, you know, now I'm grateful. You know, I can wake up in the morning and I'm grateful for the most basic things. And that is such a shift for me, to have gratitude for, you know, having a roof over my head, being, you know, breathing, for, you know, having food in my belly, having food in the fridge, you know, the simple things. You know, having that gratitude from being someone that just only ever wanted more of everything, to someone who's grateful for the basic things, really shifted my outlook on life. And, you know, nowadays I'm a happy person. You know, when I used to think, all my thoughts were negative, and now, you know, I wouldn't say 100% positive, because I don't think that's humanly achievable, but I've definitely got a lot more of a positive outlook on life than I ever had, you know, back then, in those days. I've got my health, I've got a roof over my head, I've got food, I'm not, you know, I have all these basic things which a lot of people in this world don't have, and I'm grateful for that. But on top of that, I've got my wife, I've got a beautiful family, I've got a career doing something that I absolutely love, and that stuff makes me joyous, you know. Having, you know, walking my kids to school in the morning and having them laughing or making jokes or, you know, asking me questions about life, and that fills me with joy. And that's like really basic stuff, like looking around where we are now, seeing the blue sky, seeing the, you know, the green stuff, you know, seeing people, when I help people with their music, seeing them achieve their goals in music, like just, appreciating what you've got and what we have in this world, So basically, I help other addicts stay clean. Basically, is a lot of what I do, and I do that by, one-to-one support with them. But I do that also by, helping them come together and talk and providing services for them while they do that, and being part of a community, being a constructive part of a community where I'm helping other people get stay clean and they help me stay clean. So being part of a wider community. Recovery and getting clean was, it's quite a slow process for me. It started out pretty dark. Once I didn't, like I said, I was self-medicating, so I didn't have the drugs to make me feel better, to change my feelings, to take the edge off life. So I had to find another way of doing that, and that didn't happen straight away. So it's quite dark. The first period was quite dark. But what I did have is I had a new group of friends who were all clean, and I used to spend a lot of time with them, and we would help each other and hang out, and having that connection really helped me through. And it was really about putting one foot in front of the other and not taking drugs. That was the bottom line. It's you could feel shit, you could feel terrible, but you don't take drugs. And that was, for me, when I came into recovery, I thought when I had an obsession or I had the thought that I had to take drugs, I thought I had to. I didn't know that you could sit that out and that would pass. And just learning that you could sit that out and that would pass, and that makes you a little bit stronger for next time. So it's very much a case of white knuckling it, just like holding on for dear life in the early days, I think, and not taking drugs no matter what. And then by getting through that made me a little bit stronger. And by doing the work I spoke about, the CBT, the other work, that really helped me to know myself. And once I got that gratitude, and once I got the self-acceptance and the beginnings of self-love, I didn't really want to take drugs anymore. And I think that was a seismic shift for me, because I was someone that needed, in my mind, I needed the drugs. They were my they were my way of escaping the world. So to actually come into the world and actually like being in the world was a massive step. My first year at the Zoo Project, I was in recovery, and that was like a momentous period for my career. That was like a boosting period. It was the Zoo Project was the buzz party of Ibiza at that period, and they had me on the seal pit and the outside stage, and they were putting me in a headline position, and I recorded an album for them. So that was my first year of recovery, and that was like a stepping stone for the rest of my career. But what I did have is I had that determination and that single-mindedness to make it happen, because a career in music is not easy. It's not easy to build a career in music. And I've just celebrated 20 years of performing live, and people have, quite a few people in the press have said, it's unusual to have someone in electronic music that has a 20-year career, although probably only the last 15 years of it could be what you'd probably count as a career, because that's when I've been clean. So if anyone is struggling, the best thing you can do is ask for help. And we all suffer when we are struggling. We all suffer from denial, and there's going to be points of time where you are in denial, but those points when you're not in denial and you really know that you're struggling, reach out for help. And there's help out there. There's fellowships. There's there's places where you can phone helplines and get the kind of help that you need. There's 12-step programs. There's lots of stuff out there where you can find people who are in your position and who are willing to help you.
Life After Sesh aims to promote safer and more mindful partying, better mental hygiene, and a deeper connection between party people.